This is the Efficiency Equation, a show for plant managers spilling hard earned wisdom and secrets in the search for the efficiency code in liquid manufacturing. I'm Konstantin, together here with Eugene, and today we're hosted by Den Rennie. Let's dive in.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode number 5 of the Efficiency Equation cast. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about scheduling, production scheduling, especially when it comes to the edible oils manufacturing plants and manufacturing operations. And the last time we all met was in episode 4, where we talked about quality, and quality is such a huge issue. And so when we went on tangents in that episode, what ended up happening is that we would quite often like go into and touch on the topics of scheduling and everything that has to do with the digitalization of scheduling. So we thought, why not do a whole episode on it? Because it's huge. It's on the top of minds of production planners and plant managers. And so with that, we're going to dive right in with our hosts, as always, Eugene and Konstantin parodies of. Welcome, you guys. Why don't we kick off with the easy questions, and then we can get into the tough ones, right? Okay. So concerns. We always like to start with problems. So tell me about the concerns that production planners have. Especially, so we're narrowing our conversations to edible oils and soft drinks because it's a different beast and it's what we know best. So what are some concerns when it comes to production planning?
Well, to answer that question, just imagine what it is that the production planners that do the scheduling, what it is that they're trying to do every day that they come to work. So either they are creating the schedules in just-in-time environment where they have to meet the customer demand by scheduling production to customer orders, or they are creating inventory and there's still some kind of higher level plan of what they need to create. So to be able to meet that demand, they need to know a few things. They need to know that they have the raw materials, that the raw materials necessary to produce those products are available. They also need to make sure that demand forecasting is accurate, because if they were asked to create something, but then last minute there's a change and somebody comes in and says, no, 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 do this instead. Or if nobody does that, but it's still inaccurate and they end up filling the storage capacity, but nobody picks it up because it was inaccurate forecast. That's also a problem. So you have raw material variability, you have demand forecasting, and then third major concern is quality in production, because if the production side has issues with quality, that means that everything is going to take longer to produce. So they might reprocess the product, and in that, they're going to cause delays and they're going to occupy storage capacity. And by the way, in edible oils and soft drinks industries, where they use intermediate storage tanks for the product, that in itself is an area that may create bottlenecks. So for production planners in those industries, it's very important to schedule with the tank inventory in mind so as not to create extra bottlenecks where they're not necessary. And that's where the raw materials, the demand, and the quality all impact that. Because if you have product stuck in your tanks and you can't move it because it's got nowhere to go, there's no customer coming to pick it up, you have a problem. You can't make new product now. And so then you start coming up with ideas of what to do as an alternative, either sell off intermediate products or maybe bring in some rail cars or tank wagon trailers with the trucks and try to use them for temporary storage. But that creates headache and it adds cost to your operation and it delays everything, obviously. So those are some of the concerns, I'd say.
You just said that those are some of the concerns, but you actually listed like some big behemoths in there. Eugene, what's your take?
I would add on the raw material variability side of things, where you have quite a few issues that can come up. that would impact the production planning. And like Konstantin said, some of it may be with the just-in-time model versus stocking, but also there is seasonality to things. You may not have raw materials available to you in time when you want it due to the shortage of seasons that can affect supply of, let's say, fruit or a supply of food oil. You also may have logistical delays in your supply chain, right? Because you may have rail cars coming in that are not coming in on time due to some issue with the railroad. That could also be same for the products transported by road or by sea. So those delays can be real and can really affect the outcome of your planning situation. So the visibility into these issues would definitely help the planners solve them and be more prepared for them. But that's one of the major issues in the raw material availability and variability uh, is the logistics as well.
So, what can be done to help these people, planners, their problems and concerns?
So when we talk about raw material variability and visibility into what you have to work with, there are software solutions that can help the planners to make sure that they have what they need. And just so people appreciate this issue, the complexity of this, I want to point out that when you have younger, less mature factories, they may start up with simpler models where there aren't that many different products, there aren't that many SKUs, as they like to call them. And this issue may seem relatively straightforward when they think, well, what do I have to work with? Do I have everything I need? But then as they grow bigger, they actually end up creating a lot more different variations of similar products. And those variations may require some intermediate product to be in place to make the final product. So it grows like a gigantic tree with a lot of branches, where each branch is adding something to this, some kind of value and making it a different product. And so what ends up happening in those situations is it's not just like the base raw materials. So if we're talking about edible oils, it's your base oils. If we're talking about soft drinks, it may be some kind of fruit. I'm not talking about just visibility into that, but also visibility into your intermediate products that you already pre-made something out of which you can make something else. And so that also occupies some storage space, whether it is in liquid storage tanks taking up space or it's on the shelf of your warehouse taking up your warehouse space. It's got to be there. And so for planners to create the schedule effectively, they need to be able to see what they have on hand to meet the demand. And like I said before, their demand could be customer orders or it could be the plan to produce something to stock, but they need to be able to see this. And there are software solutions that help with that. And it becomes very difficult to try to track any of that in spreadsheets. And then when we talk about demand forecasting, there's a lot of approaches and a lot of tools that try to tackle the problem of demand forecasting accuracy from different angles. You have conventional software tools that solicit forecasts from the sales reps and aggregate it all and show it to the management. And then you have different tools that do modeling. In the end, it all goes back to alignment of objectives. If the people selling the product don't have a strong incentive to give you accurate information, then it doesn't matter what tool you use, you're still going to have noise and error in your forecast. And that error translates to production planners very easily. So a sales rep giving you an accurate forecast translates into wrong raw materials being purchased, and then they sell more or less of that product. And in the end, the production planner ends up with a wrong balance of raw materials and some product they have too much of, and some product they just cannot make. So that's a very common issue. And you can throw many different types of tools at it, but it goes back to the organization, to strong leadership and alignment of objectives. And
And exactly,
one
exactly.
one thing so the other topic we talked about was quality control. And with quality control, again, we talked about this in our previous episodes. To not have quality issues cause bottlenecks, companies need to look at their rework, at their right first time, and basically adopt the mindset of, if I get most of my stuff done right first time, then I'm not causing churn in the system, and then I'm not occupying my storage capacity, whether that's storage tanks for liquid product or, again, the shelves in the warehouse. I'm not occupying that unnecessarily, because that would create a problem for scheduling, because you're just stretching everything out. And when the planner needs to meet the demand, they can't use the storage capacity that they could have used otherwise. So that's pretty much the issue with the quality there, that the higher the quality you have, the better it is for scheduling and for the planners, because everything flows faster through your supply chain and through your factory.
Yeah. So
Right.
Konstantin, you were circling back to some of the problems and concerns there for a minute. And do either of you guys have any stories, like actual horror stories that you saw in real life production environments?
Horror stories, we've seen them on different fronts in this. So on demand forecasting, we've seen a lot of stories where in different plants there would be this issue that, you know, if we're talking about soft drinks, they have inaccurate forecasts. And then the sourcing and trading or procurement group, they call them different ways in different organizations, they would run around and complain that they don't have the proper raw materials to make the product that needs to be made. And so because of that, they're forced to buy it later than they would have normally. And they're paying a premium for it because they're not pre-purchasing it. They're purchasing right away on the spot market. So there are things like that. So at the level of the plant management, they see the costs go up right away when that happens. Or if they cannot find the replacement, they just have to turn away their customers in certain orders. You see, because they can't make the product. So that usually creates a lot of commotion at the plant, and people run around like crazy. So that is an issue, and we've seen that in different organizations where first everybody thinks, okay, this is what we need to make because this is what the customer wants, and then the customer doesn't come to pick it up, and now you've just created something that sits there, and you're thinking, what do I do with it? Who else do I sell it to? So that actually happens. And people don't like to talk about it a lot, but it does happen all across the board. And it goes back to demand forecasting accuracy. So there again, it can be made more accurate with the tools, but for the tools solution to work, for the software solution to work, it still requires the entire organization to embrace it and to make sure that the people that are providing the inputs into this forecast have the proper incentives to do so. So that's the one thing I want to point out.
They have to be honest with themselves, basically. When you talking about making improvements in this area, you have to be honest with yourself as far as recognition of those issues that you need to track. Instead of trying to somehow mask or hide them, you would like to expose them to make sure that they are front and center. Because unless you have them exposed, you will not know what to improve on. You will not know which angles to approach. And that goes back to philosophy of the company and overall processes in the company that need to reflect that need to say that, yeah, we want to know how good we are on the right first time, for example. We want to know how good we are on material sourcing and availability. We want to know how accurate our demand forecasts are. And not from the point of trying to punish people for providing wrong or inaccurate forecasts or some other things in the process. It's really from the position of knowing what the problems are allows you to address them so that you do become a better company. And the software solution will work in tandem with such philosophy, and it will help to improve overall standing of your company, but only if the thinking like that is adapted as well.
Yes, and I want to add on this topic also that there are two things that normally come out of these issues, of all of them. Either you have increased downtime, and when you say horror stories and you ask for one, it's all a matter of perspective. Horror stories for who, right? So if it's increased downtime, it may be that somebody is knocking on the door of that planner and saying, "Hey, why do we have scheduled downtime everywhere? Why is the plant not producing?" But it's of course a greater horror story for the plant manager. If the plant manager has a plant and they are standing still, at least on 50% of their lines of equipment, that's a problem. So that is all a result of in these industries of having the storage tanks full, or and they're just sometimes we see this, it says we produce too much of this and we're just on standby right now and we're recycling the product. And what does it mean? Why would they have ever produced too much of something? Because somebody didn't come to buy it to pick it up, and they could have not come for their own internal reasons, that they just rescheduled it. And that goes into this whole demand variability question. But it also could be that they just didn't plan for it appropriately. And the issue with raw material visibility could be that a whole other problem comes up out of this, where it might not look like a horror story to the planner as much, but it looks like a horror story to the top management, because in the case of raw material shortages, the planner would just say, customer service, please talk to this customer. I can't really make this product because we don't have ingredient X. And that ingredient X is going to be back in stock in a month. And so that triggers the customer orders being turned away. And it might be okay to the planner, but it's not okay to the top management, because then they look at overall what was the production level at that plant, how much demand did they meet for that month, for that quarter, for that year. And the conversations sometimes can be unpleasant, because they'll say, well, this plant technically should be producing at this level, but it's producing at this level. So maybe we need to shake up the whole organization there and see if they can get their act together, So that actually does happen too a lot, So it might not look like a horror story to a planner, but it ends up being a horror story when the top manager looks at this and says, well, your plant is producing at half the throughput that it should have. Why is that? And all of these issues play into that. If you don't see where your raw materials are and you're producing something, you're bound to have a surprise that all of a sudden you can't make something, and then you need to wait. And so all of these issues, like poor quality, not knowing where your ingredients or raw materials are, and poor demand forecast, all those three things, they cause delays. And delays bring down your throughput, your production levels.
Yeah, there's another layer to this set of problems that you talked about. And I think it's that, on the one hand, what you mentioned, that it might not be a horror story at the floor level, but it is to the higher management, who will connect the numbers and identify that, hey, here's an issue that is causing a chain reaction down the production line, and it's messing with our numbers in the end, with our bottom line. And there's another layer, which is that some of these issues, even if they're small, they're not going to cause any like serious damage to anybody. They might not even show up down the line. But if they compound and they compound with other small issues and minor little things, then they tend to add up. And the difficulty about them is that if you don't have your, task tracking and all the tracking in place, you might not even realize that you have these small issues. But as you said, Konstantin, at the end of the day, people are going to look at the numbers and they're saying, okay, here we have a benchmark about how much this factory or this plant should be producing based on some industry average or norm. And we have no idea why we're underperforming.
So you have tools for that, the software solutions, but it goes back to the mindset. You have to have people at the plant who want to know that, who acknowledge that there may be issues that need improvement, And so the one other thing I wanted to mention that I haven't mentioned yet with the issues and horror stories that planners may have, it has to do with the model they operate under. So as companies shift from inventory, from stocking product to just in time, there is some interesting phenomenon that occurs particularly on the planning side, on the scheduling side. And that's the frequency of updates of the production schedule. So when you make product to stock, you tend to revise the schedule less frequently than if you make product to customer orders. And it's inherent in the nature of the model that the customers will have some variability. They might have said, I will pick up this product from you tomorrow. And then they call you and say, no, it's not tomorrow. It's actually 2 days later or 3 days later, or whatever it may be. And so when planners deal with just-in-time model, they're trying to keep inventories as minimal as possible. And when they're making product to stock and then they see that there's all these changes, now they have to readjust the schedule. And so the interesting observation we've made over the years is that there's a certain level of revisions to the schedule beyond which, if you're still revising, you're getting negative returns. And what I mean by this is usually planners have some sort of idea of what is the ideal sequence of products that they should be making, such that they could minimize the time spent on changeover. So if you're making product A and then product B, maybe in between those products, you need an hour and a half of time to clean your equipment and reset everything so that product B can successfully be made after product A. But if you're going from product A to product C, maybe product C is more similar to product A and you don't need to do as much cleaning and resetting. So the planners know this. And there is this concept that's called the production wheel or product wheel, where they create campaigns and say, well, I'm going to make product A, then product C, then product D, and whatever. And there's a prescribed sequence such that I minimize my changeover time. So changeover time, pretty much in this example, equates to wasted time. They're trying to minimize the waste. And that, in theory, creates a more productive, more efficient manufacturing plant, right? But if they are revising the schedule too frequently to adjust to the changes in demand, then they are sort of steering away from this. They are now trying to play catch up with their customer demand, and the changeover takes the back seat, you see? And there is this idea of like the perfect spot where the two philosophies meet, where you want some predictability to this, and you want to have that perfect campaign. But the perfect campaign means that you're losing agility and responsiveness to the customer demand. And if you're trying to minimize changeover 100% and have everything perfect, and if that's your goal, then you're likely producing to stock and you're not able to do just in time very well. If you're trying to do just in time perfectly, then you have this variability and your changeover increases because you're jumping around with what the customers want. And by the way, there are other mechanisms in this business where customers can be told not to disrupt the flow of orders and not to make last minute changes. But usually it doesn't quite work 100%, those kinds of rules, because if you have important customers who bring you a lot of business, they will still ask you to change their schedule last minute. And what are you going to tell them? No, I'm not going to do this for you. So it then goes back to the dynamic of how important that customer is to you and the relationship with them. But basically, yeah, you can have all these rules around not changing the customer demand last minute, and they'll still break them and they'll still change. So that going back to the production scheduler, they're trying to meet the demand. And if they're trying to go into just in time and they're trying to minimize changeover, they got to find that sweet spot somewhere where they're not 100% optimizing changeover and not 100% optimizing the agility to meet the customer demand, but they're somewhere in between. And that's a tougher spot to be in. So that's, again, you have software tools for that, but it also takes a mindset of understanding that you're never going to be perfect in everything. You can be perfect in one thing, or you can find some kind of nice combination of these parameters and work towards it.
Exactly. Eugene, Konstantin just unleashed a bunch of issues and solutions as well to most of them. But from all the issues, from all the concerns that have come up in this episode, like which one is your favorite to tackle and where do you think people should start in general? If it's possible to answer this question in general.
Yeah, I think in general, uh, we already kind of mentioned it a few times. I think in general, the main point to start with is the establishment of recognition of the fact that you need to look at these things honestly.
Mindset.
That's yes, the mindset has to be there. The philosophy has to be there that you would look at these things honestly and that you would not try to sweep it under the rug when you look at the numbers. You talked about numbers earlier, right? And you said, well, if the management looks at the numbers, what is their reaction? Is it a horror story for them or is it something that they just proudly wear on their sleeve? It really depends on that mindset because they could say, no, the numbers look good. Or they would say, we want the numbers to look good regardless of how they actually are. So that's the main point out of all of this. The first and foremost thing to do is to make sure that your organization treats these issues as important measurement points, important facts to have in front and center, so that this can help you later to see which areas need improvement first, which areas can wait. That's the only way to go with this. If you don't have that mindset, no amount of tools will help you. But after the mindset, I think the next thing to realize is what kind of model you're following at your organization. Like Konstantin said, is it just in time production where you are uh, trying to keep the lowest possible inventory levels? Or is it production to stock where you don't necessarily want to concern yourself with the minimal inventory, but rather that your products may not be as perishable, so you can keep the stock of them? And again, you don't want to overstock. So there's that. There's demand forecasting involved. So based on the model that your organization follows, you may have different points that you want to tackle first.
One one thing also that comes to mind, just to back up what Eugene was saying about the mindset, is again to your question. It ties back with the question of the horror stories. We've seen some examples where the production schedule is published to the operations side, and there's no feedback from operations back to the planners for quite a while. We're talking days. Nobody checks whether the operators are actually doing just fine with the schedule that they got, whether they're behind schedule or ahead of schedule. And so the immediate result of that is that when a planner thinks that 3 days from now, they're going to be able to produce the next thing that they need to produce. All of a sudden, they find out that they can't. And they can't because the operators are still working on the previous product and the equipment is occupied and the storage capacity is occupied. The tanks are full. Now, a planner could say, oh, okay, I'll just revise my schedule and push everything out, whatever I planned on doing. And this goes back to the mindset that we pointed out, that it has to be a mindset of being honest with themselves and looking at the results all across the organization. Because eventually, if that planner doesn't care, it's going to bubble up to the senior management and they're going to see again that the plant is operating at half its nominal capacity. What's going on? Why aren't we efficient? But if you get everyone to care about things like that, then everything changes. So if the same planner knew that, hey, I'm going to make the schedule, but all of this needs to happen, they would actually check more frequently with the operators on how they're doing. And they would anticipate every next turn that the operators are making. You see, so it changes, the whole game changes with the mindset change. And it becomes more efficient. And then as the planners have that feedback from the execution side, they're able, if that feedback comes in real time, for example, and again, there are software solutions for that, they're able to make timely decisions about what to do next. And if they need to make some kind of alternative decision, alternative product, they can do it in a timely fashion without causing delays that don't have to be there. So that's an important part, that not all plants operate with the same level of awareness of these things, of how important it is to see what's actually happening in real time.
Nice.
Right. And also looking at the measurements after you have the mindset, you need to make sure that you make the most use of the measurements that the software solutions can provide. Uh, Measurements like right first time, on time and in full, OEE, uh, all kinds of scorecards that you can have in software solutions, manufacturing scheduling stability. How stable is your schedule? How frequently you're making changes? Is it in line with what's expected for your particular model of manufacturing? All those measurements are very useful in helping you build a better organization, but only if you recognize them, only if you actually track them and being honest with yourself.
That's a great way to end it, because I feel like, in many of these episodes, we talk about vastly different things like production planning or quality, transportation. Well, not vastly different, but quite different areas within the realm of bulk liquid manufacturing. And so often we circle back to the same fundamentals. That is, know your numbers, have the right philosophy or mindset in place, make sure you're optimizing for the right things and not just wanting to make the numbers pretty, not jumping on trends. So often we jump back to these fundamentals, and there's obviously a lot more, but it's so great to see how, like, 5 episodes into this podcast, we already have quite a few like resounding themes. So Konstantin, I know initially we agreed on not talking about what the next episode is going to be, and we're not, but I'm just going to throw this in there that sooner or later we will want to do like a meta episode, because I feel like the first 5 episodes have been so like dense with just knowledge and advice and solutions and peeling back the layers of problems, that I think we want to think about, how to sort of settle and condense everything and just do like an overview, like a meta analysis of everything that we talked about, or like a big summary. That's just an idea for you guys.
Sounds good. I don't know how soon we're going to be able to do it, because there's a lot more coming that we haven't covered.
Yeah. Yes. I purposefully left out like the episode number. So it doesn't have to be next episode, but just down the line. And I just wanted to tease our listeners and viewers that this is coming. It's going to be like the lesson of lessons.
Yeah. Cross section, study of studies.
And one thing I wanted to add, if we're wrapping up this conversation, again, talking about if I have plant managers who are listening to this, and I could suggest something that would definitely help the planners in terms of their scheduling, in terms of getting efficient with everything, I would definitely recommend plant automation at the level of tank level sensors. So if you are operating with manual gauge reading or tank dipping, and this takes a long time to actually complete the entire inventory check, you're losing a lot of detail, a lot of visibility because the product keeps moving all the time. And so that translates into the loss of throughput of your production plant because it creates mistakes and mistakes delay things. And we've just talked about how delay and mistakes, same as quality issues, they are in fact quality issues. They delay everything and you're not producing as much as you could have been producing. Consequently, your plant is not making as much money as it could have been making. So if we had a choice between giving the execution side the tank sensors that tell them how much product they have in the tank instantaneously, that would help them. That would help the production planners because with that, there are software solutions that can then help you get to your real-time visibility of what you got on hand. So if I could ask any plant managers to consider that, to me, the business case for having the sensors on the tanks is a no-brainer, and after that, you get real-time visibility with a little bit more investment. And the one thing that all the planners I wish they could have is the ability to do what if scenarios analysis. If you're sitting there and you're spending all your day on creating this perfect schedule, and then something changes, and now you have a question, well, what if I did something differently? But to be able to answer that, now you need to spend another day recreating the schedule. That's just too long, and you may end up not doing it. But if you used some of the modern software tools for this, they could actually give you that what if scenario. And you would look at it and say, aha, if I did it this other way, I might have had a better outcome. So I just want to end with this, that for the production planners, we want to, if I had a magic wand and I could give them the automation at the level of at least knowing how much product they have in each storage tank, that would be one. Real-time feedback from the execution, from the assembly line back to the planners as to where they are. Are they ahead of schedule, behind schedule? And the capability to do what if scenarios. I'm sure I would make a lot of planners happy.
Agreed.
Great summary. Ladies and gentlemen, that wraps up episode 5 of the Efficiency Equation podcast. And we will see you in approximately 2 weeks with episode 6. Thank you so much for hanging around and have a great day.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you so much for sticking around. I hope you could find some valuable insights from this episode. We'll be releasing new episodes soon, so stay tuned. If you have any thoughts, ideas, comments, suggestions, or just want to chat, you can find us on LinkedIn. Links are in the description. See you next time.